Hi there, my name is Gabriel. I am also known as the Finance Catalyst. I am a Christian, an entrepreneur, and the current host of the program FinTalks, where we talk about financial matters. On today's episode of my podcast, I'm going to be sharing with you 10 answers to the most common questions about money. Money is a global subject. It's a global phenomenon. And many people want to always know what are the most common questions people ask about money. It's very important to have an understanding of the ideology of money, because money itself is a tool for creating wealth. It's a tool for creating wealth. But how you use money or how you understand the concept of money, it's very, very important, because with the understanding of the concept of money, you can be able to channel your money wisely and make the right application of the principles and the tools that could help you channel your money in the right direction. So on today's podcast, on this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you these questions. And the first question I want to respond to is the question: how bad is it if I don't pay off my credit every month? Someone can ask, how bad could this be? How detrimental could this be? What I would say to you is that it's really bad, because that's the truth. You can ask people who are into debt financing. They will tell you if you don't pay your credits, it affects your credit score, and that's the score that you get from how frequent you repay those loans that you've taken from the bank or from the credit institution. Whether it's you're taking out a loan, or you're leasing a car, or you're renting an apartment. These are all pretty essential things for every human being. But a bad credit can actually hinder you in many ways, and credit collectors are basically trained to kick up your anxiety to sky levels. So when you don't have the ability to pay this credit frequently, it results in panic, in anxiety. You are always worried about your debts, and it becomes this is the goal for every credit collector, because they try to kick off your anxiety levels to a much higher degree. But when you pay your credit card debts every month, if you try to cut down those debts in a reasonable amount, where you have a structure, you have a clear structure, it helps you going forward to be very intentional about clearing your debts, and that leads me to the point of making or creating a revised payment plan. You have to have a payment plan. How do you intend to pay off these debts? It's very, very important, because these things will help you reduce your stress levels. When you have a repayment plan, you have a plan. It's very important to always have a plan, and also to stick to that plan when you're repaying your debts, because it's very, very key, to clearing your credit card debts. Credit is one of the most common things in the financial environment. Where most people, you see a lot of people get into loans, taking all sort of loans. But it's important that when you are doing this, you must have a plan on how you intend to make the repayment. And it's very key. So with respect to credit cards, it's very important that you spend time to analyze your credit score, know how frequent you want to make your payments, clear your debts, and then the next thing you want to do is to make sure that every time you make your repayments, there's a consistency. There's a consistency. You maintain it. You don't just give up at some point. You this month you make some payments, and next month you don't. No, you have to be consistent, and your intentionality about this is what helps you in clearing out this debt or cutting off these debts. So that's very important for you to pay attention to. So the second question I want to address here is the question. It says, what does a realistic budget look like? I've talked about budgeting in several other episodes of my podcast. If you've not listened to the concept of budgeting, I would indulge you to go back to those episodes and pay attention to the things I shared there, because they are very, very important and they are very, very vital, to your financial health and your financial well-being. So talking about a realistic budget, is there anything more satisfying than sitting at home on Friday night feasting on ramen noodles or working on your budget? Or literally anything is more appealing than that. When we get to understand the idea of budget, budget is something that you cannot do without when you are building your financial capacity. It's important for you to have a plan and a budget. In this regard, I remember talking about the 50-20-30 structure of budgeting in one of my episodes of this podcast. So I won't share here, but you have to go back and listen to those particular details, because it's very, very key and very, very important for you, to be able to make the necessary plans and put the necessary structures in place when it comes to your budget. So I talked about the 50-20-30 plan, or you can also call it the 50-20-30 system of budgeting, which helps you to get a more flexible way of allocating your financial resources. And also when it comes to the area of budgeting, you need to give yourself an allowance. This is actually one of the cardinal rules, from the concept of budget. You need to give yourself an allowance. Always consider the future you. How does your future look like? How does the future you looks like? You need to consider those things, when building a budget, and when you are inevitably adjusting your budget. You have to make sure that your future, in the near future, you are happy with your long-term and your short-term plans. It's very, very important to pay attention to this. So budgeting is something that you have to be clear about and intentional about. And a lot of people don't do this in area of their finances. When they get some sort of funds, instead of them paying attention to okay, how am I going to allocate these funds? You see that at the end of the day, they don't have a clear systematic budget, and then they see it gets to a point where they start spending even the money in a way that they don't even know at the end of the month how it was allocated. So with budget, it helps you to be more intentional about your financial resources, what you get, how do you spend it, and what are the things that you need to pay more attention or less attention to. These are the things that the budgeting will help you with. So I'll indulge you to always stick to a budget whenever you are planning your financial you are planning your finances, or you are planning for your financial future. Always have a budget in mind, whether for the short term or for the long term. So moving on, talking about the third question I want to address here. It says, how much debt is too much debt? You might want to ask, how much debt is too much debt? Again, it depends. You cannot, this question, you cannot necessarily have the perfect answer to it. It always depends. For example, student loans are one thing that you have maybe heard about. They call it a good debt. Some people might call it a good debt versus the credit card debt, or what often is called as a bad debt. This is because interest rates on a student loan debt is significantly less than that of a bad debt, which is the credit card debt. Because this is thought that a student loan is something that is geared towards getting a degree, which would help you get a higher paying job, unlike a credit card debt, which keeps you more for other things. You take this debt for other related things, like other expenses. Maybe it could be a car loan towards a car, or towards a property, real estate property, or towards personal loans. This is a different kind of debt in particular. But if you are still not sure, you have to ask yourself this question: can you only make the minimum on your payments, or are you skipping certain bills to pay off others? Are your cards maxed out? Like, have you spent a lot on your cards that you've gone beyond the limit? I'm precisely talking about your credit card. Are you living paycheck to paycheck? These are questions you need to ask yourself, because they are very, very important. If you are maxed out on all your several credit cards, you have to come up with a dedicated plan how to pay them down, to pay down all those, clear those debts immediately. You have to focus on paying off those cards with the highest interest first, and then pick the remaining ones one at a time. I talked about this method. It's like a snowball. We normally call it the snowball effect. It's more like elimination method, where you take the credits with the highest interest rate, clear those ones first before focusing on the ones with the least interest rate. In that way, you are intentionally clearing off the debts that you have in stock. So it's very important that you don't accrue so much debt, in your financial situation, because when you have so much debt, it becomes difficult for you financially to focus on things that are more important. Debt is something that you have to be careful about. You don't just incur debts when you don't know the right tools or the right principles how to use it. You can use debt to your advantage, of course. There are, like I said earlier in the course of this podcast, there are debt financing. People use debt to finance a whole lot of things, and they make a good deal of profit from it. So it depends on how you understand the concept of debt. I'll be addressing that in a separate episode. The idea of debt financing, how you can pay attention to this area, and how you can use debt financing in a way it becomes important for you to achieve the things you want to achieve financially. So number 4, the fourth question I want to address here is how much should I actually be spending on fun stuff? You might want to ask yourself, what are fun stuff? Fun stuff are things that you consider like something pleasant to you, something you just want to have fun with. How much is something that you just want to spend money on to relax, to relax yourself? This question is very important to address, because this largely depends on your lifestyle, and your location as well. Many financial experts actually recommend allotting 9 to 10% for your food costs, and once you have determined a number, you try to hold yourself to it. That's very important, because don't especially for young people that are just coming up financially, it's always important not to try to live an exuberant lifestyle. Don't try to do things that someone who has spent 40 years trying to achieve these things are doing. It's where sometimes the challenge comes when you're trying to keep up with the Joneses. Let me just put it that way. The concept of keeping up with the Joneses, trying to impress others at the detriment of your own self financially. It's very important to be careful with this, because when it comes to your financial capacity, financial growth is systematic. It's intentional. It's a process. It's not something you just acquire in one go. It takes a step-by-step process by applying the reviewed principles and means. It's very, very important to pay attention to this. And talking about allocating 9 to 10%, many financial experts talk about this. Allocating 9 to 10% for your food costs, and once you have determined that, you have to just stick to it. And as for your fund budget, we've come across so many different pieces of advice. I've also read that about 30% can be dedicated to things you want but don't need. Things you actually want, but necessarily is not something really that you will need at that point, but you just like it, you want it. And we also saw that 10% touted as a fun magic number is something that people also pay attention to. So look over your past year of expenses. You have to look over your past year of expenses to see what you've spent on fun, i.e. your clothing, your makeup, your nights out, your getaway weekends. You have to evaluate those things, and while evaluating those things, you have to build your fund budget with that in mind. So when you're having such kind of plan, you have to know how your budget is going to look like. what your fund budget is going to look like. It's really critical, and paying attention to this helps you structure your fund budget in such a way that you are consistent with it. Like I said, you don't have to you have to think about the things that you normally do, maybe on a quarterly basis for fun or on a monthly basis for fun, depending on how your structure is. But when you know these things, you then have to be set out a fund budget in such a way that you don't have a distortion. It's always consistent. If your fund budget for this month is like $500 or 500 euros, the next thing you have to think about, you don't have to start increasing that in the following month for any reason. You have to just remain consistent, because at the end of the day, regardless, if you try to make it up and down, it distorts your allocation in your overall budget. Your overall budget, when I mean your overall budget, is like you have your fund budget, that's just something for your normal ordinary expenses, things that are necessary, like I said, things that you don't necessarily want, but something you don't necessarily need, rather, but you just want to have it. It's not necessarily that you will need it, but you just want to have it. So pay attention to your fund budget. Make sure that when you are making such plans, you don't distort the flow. On whether you're doing it on a monthly basis, or you're doing it on a bi-weekly basis, or you're doing it on a quarterly basis. The most important thing is just to be consistent with what you're doing. So moving on, talking about the sixth question. The question is, how soon do I need to start saving for retirement? I get a lot of this question a lot. People talk about their saving plan for retirement. What's the plan for that? What I can say is, as soon as you can, as soon as you can, you just have to start saving for your retirement. It's called financial adulting. It's very important. I know, because I've seen people who did not pay attention to this earlier on in their career, and then going forward it became a challenge. It's very important. That's why you see sometimes people have these pension plans for those who are working for an employer, or in the commercial sector. They have this pension plan scheme that helps them to, allocate some certain amount of funds to their pension plan, in the sense that towards is geared towards a certain age of their retirement, and then of course they get these funds. So it's very important to save for your retirement. The more you accrue and then of course the compounding interest, it helps you. If your employer doesn't offer a 401k or a similar model, you have to consider allotting some of your monthly savings to a personal retirement account. I know most employers, they do have this pension scheme plan that they do allocate, but just peradventure your employer doesn't have that, or maybe you are self-employed and you don't have that kind of structure, then you need to start thinking about how you can have an optional a retirement account, or a kind of a monthly savings plan that goes to your personal retirement account. It's very, very important. If they also offer, if your employer offers other forms of retirement plans, it's important to also look at those things. Other retirement options could include the IRA, both Roth IRA and the traditional IRA options that are worth researching. And if you are more advanced with your retirement savings, or maybe mutual funds or bonds and more, these are more things that are worth learning about. There's always an exception. If you have high interest debts, for example, like those pesky credit cards, like I addressed in question 1, then you need to focus on paying them first. You need to focus on paying them first before getting sidetracked by thoughts on retirement, because it's obvious, you cannot just focus on saving for your retirement when you have debts all over the place. So you have to focus on clearing those debts first, and before you start thinking of how you can sidetrack your thoughts towards retirement. The same goes if you have no emergency savings. For additional tips, I would share in other episodes. But when you don't have an emergency savings. You don't have to focus on just saving for retirement, because emergency funds, I talked about it in several other episodes, it's something you put aside in case of emergency, something that you have to put aside just in case something urgent or something of an emergency comes up, and you take those funds to be able to solve those financial related issues. So that's just it on the question number 6. So moving on, question number 7. How much money should I have in an emergency fund? I just talked about emergency fund. It's something you have to put aside for the cost of an emergency. So someone is now asking, how much money should you have in an emergency fund? What I would say is 3 to 6 months of your post-tax income seems to be the consensus in financial circles. 6 months is an ideal time frame, but given that most of us don't have any emergency savings, you are ahead of the curve if you make it half that far. So you ideally, I would recommend you to have a 3 to 6 months of post-tax income allocated to your emergency fund. So having such kind of structure could help, because at the end of the day, you never know. Sometimes we have some unforeseen circumstances. You don't have to start waiting for the time that these things come around. Then you try to figure out how to clear those unforeseen expenses. So that's why the emergency fund is so important, because when you have that in place, whenever you have challenges financially that you need to sort out with urgent effect, you don't have to start thinking, oh, where am I going to get these funds from? Where am I going to get that funds from? No, you then have to focus on your emergency fund, using the funds from your emergency fund to fix those challenges or those issues that you encounter. So moving on, number 8 would be, how can I save enough to take a big trip once a year? People always talk about this. How can you save enough to take a big trip once a year? By setting up a separate savings account just for that trip is very, very key. So if you are planning to take a trip once a year, some people don't like the idea of having trips on a regular, like maybe once in 3 months, once every month, or once every quarter. There are some people that just prefer, I just want to embark on a very nice trip once a year. So what you just need to do in that regard then is to have a separate savings account for that particular trip. You just have to have an idea of what's the budget for the trip, what are the things that you want to do in the course of the trip, or if it involves your flight ticket, some other additional expenses, your hotel bills. You just have to factor those things into account and place it in a realistic budget. And then you have to have a separate account. When I mean a separate account, a separate savings account just for that trip. And what you can do that I could also give you as a tip that will help you. Each week you can make a recurring transfer out of your fund money. I talked about your fund budget, where you have to put things that you necessarily would do for fun. So maybe every week as you get funds, you can just transfer a particular portion. Like you can make a direct mandate from your bank account, or recurring transfer on you could do it bi-weekly, you could do it on a monthly basis, just depending on how flexible it is for you or how comfortable it is for you. You can do that, make a recurring transfer out of your fund money allotment into your account, and you can watch it add up. You should also consider areas where you can cut back to achieve your goal. If you are looking at some things that you feel that, I don't necessarily need to be doing this, those funds that you are going to be allocating to those things, you can easily reduce it, or just even take it out from there and allocate it from your fund budget to your budget for the trip. It's not every time necessarily you need to have fun, financially, but there are other things you could do that you could have fun with that is necessarily key and important to you. So having said that, that takes me to the next question. The next question is Number 9, it says, I already cut corners with my budgets, skipping the latest packing lunch. These are examples, and it's still not enough. What now? What should I do? This is important. Simply cutting your avocado toast out of your budget is not going to magically put you into a mortgage ready position. Avocado toast is not a significant amount, you'll see. It doesn't necessarily put you into a mortgage ready position. But nice try selling that one. It's important that for example, your expenses might just be too high for your income. Sometimes people tend to spend so much money on expenses that are not necessarily important. important. So you need to understand that your income has to be measured up to your expenses. Don't try to overspend, try to spend more than you earn. This is very, very important for you to pay attention to. So when making analysis or trying to understand how things should operate with your expenses, you have to make sure that your expenses matches up with your income. When your expenses are more than your income, it becomes a problem financially. So this is something you need to pay attention to. So moving on, number 10, the 10th question. It says, I am moving in with my partner. How do we divide up our finances? This particular question, it's overly, it's a subject, it's a particular area that is very, very critical. It's very, very important to pay close attention to. Moving in and splitting expenses sounds like it could give a lot of peace of mind, but it can end up being quite the opposite. Typically, you shouldn't share accounts with your partner if you are not legally tied together or you are not legally married. It's not something you should consider. I would not recommend that. The reason is because your partner might have much higher debts than you are. And when you have that kind of situation, or you are in that kind of situation, sharing a single account can be an issue. It could be a major problem. So it's important when it comes to the areas of your finances, you have to be very deliberate and intentional about how you handle those things. But when you are legally married, you have a partner. What you guys should also try to consider is when it comes to the rent and the household expenses, how do you split this? Splitting everything equally certainly seems like the ideal thing to do, but we all know how much more complicated relationships are when it comes to money. Money issues in relationships can be very, very complex and a complicated subject to deal with. So I would recommend not holding yourself to standards based off of what you think people should do. No, come up with rules, come up with standards that are comfortable for the both of you. That is very, very important. Not quite so long, I was reading The Rich Dad Poor Dad again, and the author was sharing something very, very important when it comes to the area of finances and the home with the partners. He could come up with a structure, for example, where you have 3 different accounts: one personal account for the man, one personal account for the woman, and then of course a general account for all the expense related items in the home. You could have this structure, but the most important is also to have something that works best for the both of you. That's very important, and that's very critical to your financial well-being. So, having said all this, I hope you were able to get as much information on all the questions that were raised, on the 10 main common question most people ask about money. I believe this particular episode was very insightful and helpful to you. If you've not yet subscribed to this podcast, I will indulge you to keep to do so, and also keep glued to this podcast, because there are several other topics we talk about that are very, very important and insightful, and also geared towards your financial awareness and your financial well-being. So until I see you again in my next episode, I want you to stay always financially healthy, stay financially safe, and I'll see you again on my next episode. Cheers.